So the presentation is about platform engineering on Kubernetes. That's kind of like the topic that I've been talking a little bit about. And I wanted to do some sort of like recap of what has been going on in that space for the last few years. So my name is Mauricio Salatino. I am Salaboy in Twitter and all the social networks. And I work for a company that's called Diagrid. We are working on this project called Dapper. I will be talking a little bit about that later on. So the reason that why I'm here is because I started writing this book titled Platform Engineering on Kubernetes in February of 2020, and it got published in October of 2023, right? So it took me quite a while to write this book, mostly because of the Kubernetes space changing a lot and the projects around it. It's pretty hard to write a book about these things because they change all the time and they change really, really fast. So the book takes like a very practical approach on building platforms on top of Kubernetes. It basically shows you how to combine different projects to do the most basic things that you want to do with platforms. And it focuses on kind of like platform backends and mechanisms and APIs, right? I'm super happy to say that Stoneforge here, they have some copies of the book that they will be raffling at the end of the day. So if you want a copy of the book, you need to go to their booth and sign some forms or something. And there is like a discount code also if you want to buy that for yourself. So the book, kind of like the important part of the book, I think, is the repository that comes with the book. That's the URL for all the hands-on tutorials using a bunch of different tools. So if you want to learn how to use these tools, check that repository. The repository is translated in Spanish, in Chinese, in English, in something else that I don't remember. And somebody started the Portuguese translation. So if you want to help while reading this in English and you want to help the Portuguese community, please feel free to create an issue and help me out with the translation, because this is all community driven as well. So what you will find there is I think that 25 plus hands-on tutorials with different tools, creating platforms and combining them just to do different things. So if you check out what has been happening in the past is that last year Google published this report about what's going on in the platform engineering space. There are two big areas in platform engineering: the technical side and then the organizational side. This report is a little bit closer to what's going on with large organizations building platforms. And it basically says that there are three main things that organizations that are doing it well are doing. So they are focusing on making sure that platform engineers collaborate very closely with development teams and other teams like data scientists, right? And I think that even if it sounds like something super basic, most companies get this wrong. The second thing is having a platform as a product mindset. That basically means that when you build internal platforms for your teams, you treat these teams as customers. So whatever feature you build, it needs to be targeted to solve a very specific problem. And finally, something that as an engineer, I always forget about this, is measuring for success, right? If you're building a platform, it needs to be doing something good for your teams, and you need to be able to measure that to validate that you're doing it right. If you don't measure, you don't get the benefits of the platform. Before starting writing the book, I think that I was in a completely different mindset. The entire industry back in 2018 was in a different place. Kubernetes was being adopted fast, but there was still a lot of doubts in the industry about why do we need to use Kubernetes. I remember spending a lot of time in 2018, 2019 in describing to companies why they should adopt Kubernetes. Nowadays, you will go to any cloud provider and they will have a list of things of why Kubernetes is good for the organization and why we should use Kubernetes as our base layer to build platforms. I will not spend time describing this because you will find this in every cloud provider. This is from IBM, so check it out. Pretty interesting reasons why we should adopt Kubernetes. But adopting Kubernetes is not only adopting Kubernetes, it's adopting the entire cloud native ecosystem, because Kubernetes is just the base layer. You need to build on top, you need to add a lot of functionality. So it became quite clear that we needed a new approach for building solutions on top of Kubernetes, and that approach is what we know today as platform engineering on Kubernetes specifically, right? Platform engineering has been around for a long time, but when we talk about Kubernetes-based platforms, it basically means something different on the technology side. So interesting. I was working at Red Hat. I also worked for VMware before on different open source projects. Both companies were building these Kubernetes-based, platforms for their customers. And it was super interesting to see that they were focused heavy on infrastructure. And the more we made progress on these projects, the more we realized that now we need to start jumping to help developers to use all these tools. It's not easy for a developer to start using tools like Kubernetes, or even like tools more like on the CNCF, like Argo CD or Crossplane, because those tools are designed for other kind of like, operation infrastructure side teams. So it's kind of like at that point I said, okay, before publishing the book, I realized we need to help more developers. So I switched to this company, which is working for Dapper, which basically provides that like a way to decouple infrastructure from applications by providing application APIs. So I will have a presentation later on with Francisco about Dapper project plus Backstage plus how it ties back into platforms. So I recommend you to check it out. Now, since I published the book, tons of things have happened in the last 2 years. In the platform space, the platform space has consolidated quite a lot. We have seen a lot of activity there, and a lot of companies jumping into building platforms in a more serious way. What I've been doing since I published the book basically is I've been talking to a lot of different companies around the world about like how do they build platforms and how they adopt technology. And I can classify the companies into 3 different categories, right? The first category is like the evaluation phase, when we want to understand the tools that we will be using to build platforms, including Kubernetes. The second phase is companies that are already running a lot of production workloads on top of Kubernetes, but they are now focused on optimizing their practices and scaling them up. And the third one, which I believe is the one that it's like, the leaders in the space are now designing, platform capabilities. How do we provide these things for other teams to use without exposing them to all the complexity that these tools brings into the picture? So first phase, when I talk to companies in this first phase, they are all about like, okay, how do I use Kubernetes? That it's hard. How do I do observability on top of Kubernetes? How do I do security and scalability? When you talk to companies in this phase, you cannot talk to them about any other things because they are extremely busy learning these topics. This can take a company 2 years to go through the phase of learning and implementing these technologies. So when you talk to companies in that space, it's very clear that you need to let them focus on that. And as a community, we need to make sure that all these topics are easier to get started with. Today, actually, it takes like 2 years for an organization to pick all these things up. When you are in that space, you're talking about, maybe service meshes. Some companies like service meshes, like banks, large organizations, they really take security very seriously. So they start investigating this kind of tooling. Open telemetry for observability is kind of like the right first step towards implementing like a robust observability story. And then, containers, how do you package your deployment files in order to deploy your applications and manage your workloads? These all things make sense at that phase, and you actually need to master all these tools in order to go to the next phase. Is people that it's already running in production. When I talk to these companies, it's all about optimizations. How do they do things in a better way? Because they are deploying things, they are running their production workloads, but they will start having different set of requirements. GitOps is something that comes up pretty often in that phase. There are tons of people doing GitOps nowadays, but to do it efficiently at scale across multiple clusters and across multiple environments is not that simple with just a single tool, right? So you need to start combining things to get things done. And of course, there is a lot about like, provisioning cloud resources, like infrastructure as code tools. There is a lot of that, and depending on the choices that you made on these kind of tools is the flexibility that you have to hire people, but also to grow, internal libraries for you to be more efficient. In this phase, it's also becoming clear that you will pick like mature projects like Argo CD or Flux or even Harbor for containers. But at the same time, I see a lot of companies here saying maybe we don't know enough about observability. So maybe we need to rely on a third-party service like Datadog or Dynatrace because we don't have the knowledge in-house to deal with these topics. And finally, which I think it's the most important thing for people starting in their platform engineering journeys, kind of like building platform capabilities and designing platform capabilities is becoming something that, most people in the CNCF space is kind of like looking pretty heavily. Mostly because this means that we are going to make platforms that are easy to consume. So things like, hiding low-level details of the tooling that we are using. So if you chose, like in previous phases, right? If you said, I'm going to use Argo, Crossplane, and I'm going to use Helm for packaging my applications, how do we hide all that from the consumers of the platform, right? How do we make sure that development teams don't need to learn Helm to create their applications, right? Can we automate all that stuff or not? And something that in the last 3 years been picking up a lot is like developer experience. Developer experience is extremely related on how do we hide all this complexity from developers, but also how do we make sure that we don't break their workflows, right? Like they know how to build applications. How do we make sure that whatever we do, we just don't disrupt them at all with the tools that we are pushing them to use? And I think that that's extremely important. My expectation for the next few years is that we will be working a lot around that, and there will be a lot of CNCF project in that space. In this phase, when we're building platform capabilities, again, it's all about hiding complexity. So project like Backstage, it's becoming kind of like a project that is fundamental in making sure that people access a lot of different tools by just looking at the things that they need to look at, right? So Backstage, it provides you the ability to create a portal that basically will surface tools from different other tools in a way that developers or even data scientists can understand. So check that out if you haven't checked it out. Again, we have a presentation with Francisco later on about Backstage, and we will be showing kind of like Backstage in action. Open Feature and Dapper are two of these projects that also do something very similar in the sense that they expose APIs for developers to consume. Developers will look into APIs and they will get something out of it without understanding where the backend of those APIs are running. The idea here is to just split the world in half. You see APIs as a developer. Behind the APIs, there is the platform team wiring up all the complexity behind. And then you know, like Argo rollouts and Keynote will provide you mechanisms to do different release strategies like canary releases or A/B testing. Again, helping teams to release more software basically more easily. And in the last 2 years, we have seen a lot of this, like consolidation, right? About like stacks. You will see a lot of companies showing other companies how to combine projects together. So in this case, we are looking at the Backstack that shows Backstage, Argo CD, Crossplane, and Kyverno for a very simple but very functional platform. And the idea here is that if you're starting your platform journey, you don't need to start from scratch. You don't need to understand how to combine all these things. You can take this and then you can start from there, adding more projects. Similar with Kanui, this is mostly coming from AWS. Basically, it's a blueprint for creating platforms that basically shows you the most basic behaviors that you will need to have implemented in your platform, and then you can build on top of this. It's way much more complicated than the Backstack, but again, it shows you kind of like a starting point on where to start if you're starting from scratch. And finally, something coming from China, Fusion Stack. Again, much more complicated thing, but this is heavily focused on artificial intelligence and real-time analytics. So you have projects like Carport that do a lot of that, like search and insights across clusters. And again, all open source, all useful, very, very useful stuff. Something that I wanted to call out in here is, again, you can see the industry moving in that direction where we want to help companies to get started faster. And I wanted to mention the Red Hat Developer Hub, mostly because, again, it's based on Backstage. They created a curated, library of Backstage plugins that allow teams to quickly create a portal that abstract a lot of the complexity behind the covers. They integrate with a bunch of tools, and they basically will simplify your job, right? And one more thing that happened last year in 2024, the application development working group was created inside the CNCF, again, to create a channel where we can connect platform engineers with developers. And again, this is becoming extremely, extremely important. So let's talk a little bit about the future in the last 5 minutes. What's going on? What's going to happen this year, next year? I think that's kind of like always interesting to see. First of all, this year, at some point, this will be announced, the platform engineering certifications from CNCF. For me, I'm not a big certification guy, but I'm really happy that this is happening, mostly because this means that the industry is maturing. We are getting better at explaining what platform engineering is, and there is a lot of demand of people understanding what this is so they can contribute to their organizations. So check this out. This is super important. In London next week, in KubeCon Europe, we will have for the first time the application development track, again, trying to get developers closer to the CNCF and to platform engineers. I'm super happy that this is happening because, again, this highlights the importance of communicating with developers and building more tools in that space. And one more thing, CNCF has like all these advisory groups. There is a new one that is created right now that it's called Developer Experience. So again, expect more about developer experience, more about developers and how developers can use all these tools. On the pure Kubernetes side of things, I've noticed this happening more and more and more projects are popping up. Multi-cluster challenges around multi-clusters needs to be solved in a very specific way, right? Last year in KubeCon North America, the project Q was kind of like highlighted in one of the keynotes, and this is all about like scheduling distributed jobs across multiple clusters. How do you do that? I mean, you can build your own solution to do that, but to do it efficiently, it's really hard. So they demonstrated, like, you place your job in a single cluster and that gets distributed across different clusters across regions. Super interesting. The same with KCP. KCP is a project that was created a long time ago, but now it's getting a second momentum. It's all about accessing multiple clusters using a single API, right? So you send commands to a single API that can be querying multiple clusters. Pretty interesting. When you're dealing with 200 clusters, you need a way to basically query against them all. And as I mentioned before, Carport for intelligent, real-time queries across multiple clusters, like a collection. This is like a real-time collection, data collection clustering solution. So it's super, super interesting. And of course, I cannot finish the presentation without mentioning something about AI. This is kind of like what I'm expecting to see next week in KubeCon London. There are like 3 pillars, and I'm not showing it correctly in this slide, but like there are 3 things happening on AI. The first one is, how do we use GPUs efficiently in Kubernetes as first-class citizens, right? So you have NVIDIA, you have Intel, you have AMD, all companies, like all the chip makers, working on making sure that you can use that efficiently in Kubernetes. That's one part. The second part is AI gateways or LLM gateways, which basically are kind of like 2 of the ones that are being mentioned today, is like the Envoy proxy AI gateway and the Dapper conversation API. The idea here is that you have a single entry point to call your LLMs, and then the platform engineering team can configure the accounts and the security for accessing these LLMs. These tools include like a lot of caching, right? So if you are sending the same prompt twice, you will get a cached response to avoid wasting money. And the same with like filtering sensitive data and all this kind of stuff. And the third pillar is the agentic frameworks, right? Like this is kind of like something that you will see not only in the cloud native space, but in the entire industry. A lot of frameworks, mostly written in Python, are popping up. And a couple of weeks ago, the Dapper project announced like their own framework for this. And I think that this is important in the sense that this is not only Python. This is every language for all the cloud native space. So if you're building containers in any programming language, you can start building agents with a tool that is basically cloud native, reusing all the cloud native concepts in there. So just to finalize kind of like this short session, I'm really hoping to see more blueprints like the ones that I showed. So what I expect, like in London even now, like in a week, to see more companies showing how they combine open source projects together to create their platforms. And the more that we have that in the industry, the easier it will be for new companies building their own platforms. And I will mention it for the 10th time already. I really hope that we bring developers closer here, because again, if we stay focused only on infrastructure, we are not making our platforms useful for the teams that should be using this platform. So, obrigado. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me.